Imagine walking into a restaurant, excited for a nice meal, only to be met with hostility. Now imagine being unable to defend yourself because no one understands you. Lena, a young woman who has been deaf since birth, enters a busy diner, eager to enjoy a simple meal. But the moment she tries to communicate with the waitress, she's met with rolling eyes, impatience, and cruel mockery. She isn't just ignored, she's humiliated. But what happens when the restaurant owner witnesses this injustice? Will he step in, or will Lena be forced to endure yet another painful experience in silence? Stay with me to find out. The sound of plates clattering and faint chatter fills the warm, cozy atmosphere of Maplewood Diner, a small but beloved eatery in town. The walls, adorned with vintage photos and handwritten notes from satisfied customers, tell stories of joy, comfort, and kindness. But today, an entirely different story is about to unfold. At a corner table near the window, a middle-aged man sits with a steaming cup of coffee. His name is Richard Carter, the owner of the diner. With salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, Richard built this restaurant on the belief that every customer deserves respect. The front counter is managed by Tracy, a young waitress in her late 20s. With her perfectly polished nails and a phone always within reach, she's more interested in scrolling through social media than providing service. Her sharp tongue and impatience have already led to more than a few customer complaints, but she brushes them off, knowing her charm can win over the manager. Then there's Lena, a 24-year-old woman with soft brown eyes and an infectious smile. She has been deaf since birth, but never lets her condition define her. She loves trying new foods and exploring different cafes, enjoying the world in her unique way, through taste, texture, and the kindness of strangers. Tonight, Lena enters the diner alone, her heart full of hope. She moves with confidence, her hands ready to sign her order, her phone tucked in her pocket just in case. But the moment she steps up to the counter and meets Tracy's eyes, she feels it. The coldness, the impatience. Tracy sighs loudly. "What do you want?" Lena smiles politely and points to the menu, signaling that she is deaf. She moves her hands, forming American Sign Language gestures, hoping Tracy will understand, or at least make an effort. But Tracy rolls her eyes. "Ugh, great," she mutters under her breath before laughing to herself. "I don't have time for charades." Lena's heart sinks. She quickly pulls out her phone and types her order, showing it to Tracy with a hopeful smile. Tracy glances at the screen, then scoffs. "Seriously? Just say it like a normal person." A few customers glance over, sensing the tension, but no one speaks up. Lena's hands tremble slightly as she types a message. "I am deaf. Please be patient." Tracy laughs dryly. "Oh, you're deaf? So what, I'm supposed to bend over backward for you?" She mimics exaggerated hand gestures mockingly, laughing as if Lena is some kind of joke. Lena's face turns red with embarrassment. She has faced ignorance before, but this is cruelty. But what Tracy doesn't realize is that Richard Carter, the owner of the diner, has been watching, and he's about to change everything. Lena stands frozen, her face burning with humiliation as Tracy snickers, shaking her head. The laughter isn't loud, but it's sharp enough to cut. The few customers who overheard the exchange shift uncomfortably, but no one speaks up. Lena has dealt with ignorance before, people dismissing her, assuming she's slow, treating her like an inconvenience. But Tracy's mockery is different. It's cruel, deliberate. Her fingers tighten around her phone as she swallows hard, willing herself not to cry. She starts typing again, her hands trembling slightly. "I just want to order food like everyone else." She holds up the phone, offering a small, patient smile, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Tracy will see her as a person instead of a problem. But Tracy rolls her eyes. "Oh my God, this is ridiculous. I don't have time for this." She snatches the menu off the counter and waves it in front of Lena's face. "Just point, okay? Like a little kid." A quiet gasp comes from an older woman sitting in a booth nearby. A couple across the room exchanges uncomfortable glances. They're witnessing something wrong, something deeply unfair, but no one moves. Lena's breath catches in her throat. Point? Like a little kid. She isn't a child. She isn't stupid. She's a grown woman, fully capable of communicating. If only Tracy would meet her halfway. Lena's fingers curl into her palm, and for the first time she contemplates just leaving, walking out, forgetting this place exists. But then a voice cuts through the air. "Is there a problem here?" The words are calm, firm, but there's an unmistakable edge underneath. Tracy's smirk falters. She whips around, only to come face to face with Richard Carter, the owner of Maplewood Diner. Richard had been watching the exchange from his usual seat by the window, his grip tightening around his coffee mug with each cruel word Tracy spat. At first, he wanted to believe he'd misunderstood, that maybe Tracy was just overwhelmed by the dinner rush. But no, he saw the mockery. He saw the way Lena shrank under Tracy's words. And now he's standing behind the counter, his sharp, discerning eyes fixed on his employee. Tracy forces a tight-lipped smile. "Oh, no problem at all, Mr. Carter. Just trying to take this order, but, she gestures at Lena. "It's a little difficult." Lena exhales slowly, watching Richard's expression shift. His jaw tightens, his brows drawing together. He looks at Tracy, then at Lena, then back at Tracy. His next words are quiet, but there's no mistaking the authority behind them. "Apologize," Tracy blinks. "What? You heard me?" His voice remains steady, but there's no room for argument. "Apologize right now." Tracy scoffs, throwing a disbelieving glance toward a few customers who are now watching intently. "Oh, come on, she doesn't even know what I'm saying." Lena feels something inside her twist. But Richard? He doesn't waver. "She understands perfectly," he says. "More than you think." Tracy's lips press together. For a moment it seems like she might fight back, but then she huffs, folding her arms. "Fine. Sorry." The word is clipped, insincere, thrown out as an afterthought. Richard's gaze doesn't soften. "Not good enough." Tracy rolls her eyes again, but forces a tight, reluctant smile. "I'm sorry for, making things difficult." Lena doesn't move. She just watches, because something is shifting, something important. Richard sighs and turns his attention back to Lena, his expression softening. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small notepad and pen, sliding it across the counter toward her. "I'm sorry," he writes in neat, careful letters. "That should never have happened." Lena stares at the words. They're simple, but they mean something. For the first time since stepping into the diner, her shoulders relax slightly. She picks up the pen and writes back, "Thank you." Richard nods. Then he writes again. "What would you like to order?" Lena smiles. And finally, she gets to place her order in peace. But just as Richard turns to prepare the meal himself, determined to make up for Tracy's behavior, a new voice cuts through the diner, one that sends a chill down Lena's spine. "Well, isn't this interesting?" A woman with platinum blonde hair and a sharp smirk strides into the diner, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Tracy's face lights up instantly. "Oh my God, Jessica!" Lena watches as Tracy rushes toward the woman, her entire demeanor shifting. It doesn't take long to realize why. Jessica isn't just a random customer. She's Tracy's sister. And as she turns toward Lena, her smirk widening, Lena realizes something else. She isn't just cruel like Tracy. She's worse. The diner fell silent. The moment Jessica knocked Lena's phone to the floor, the sound of it clattering against the tiles echoed like a gunshot. For a split second, nobody moved. Lena's stomach twisted into knots. Her phone, her lifeline, now lay face down, inches away from Jessica's expensive high heels. Jessica didn't even glance down at it. Instead, she smirked, turning away like nothing happened. And something inside Lena snapped. She had spent years swallowing her frustration, letting things slide. People always assumed she wouldn't fight back because she couldn't hear them. They thought that if they humiliated her, she would just accept it in silence. But not this time. Lena took a step forward. Jessica didn't notice until Lena shoved past her. Not hard, but enough to make a statement. Jessica jerked back, blinking in surprise as Lena knelt to pick up her phone. She exhaled sharply as she turned it over, her heart hammering. The screen was intact, but the crack along the corner wasn't there before. She pressed the power button. Nothing. The phone was dead. Lena's hands shook, not just from anger, but from something deeper. She didn't have a voice to defend herself in this moment. Her phone was how she communicated. It was how she existed in a world that refused to make space for her, and Jessica had taken that from her. The weight of the moment was suffocating. She stood, her breath uneven, fingers tightening around the useless device. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Oh, relax. It's just a phone." A low murmur spread across the diner. Customers shifted uncomfortably, watching. Richard saw it all. He saw Lena's clenched jaw, the way she gripped her phone like it was the only thing keeping her together. He saw the way Jessica smirked, like she had won, and Richard Carter had seen enough. He stepped forward, his movements slow and controlled. But his eyes? They burned with an anger he hadn't felt in years, Jessica noticed. For the first time, her smirk faltered. Richard stood toe-to-toe with her, his voice calm but deadly. "Pick it up." Jessica's brows knit together. "Excuse me?" Richard didn't blink. "You broke her phone. Pick it up and apologize." Jessica laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, come on, Richie," she scoffed. "It's not like she even heard it fall." The diner gasped. Lena felt her breath hitch. This wasn't just cruelty, it was calculated. Jessica wanted to hurt her, and she did. Lena gripped the counter for support, her nails digging into the wood. For a long time, she had convinced herself that these moments didn't matter, that the people who treated her this way didn't deserve her anger, her energy. But right now, she wanted to scream. Richard, however, remained eerily calm. "No," his voice was steel. "You don't get to walk away from this." Jessica crossed her arms. "Or what? You gonna call the cops? Over a phone?" Richard tilted his head. "No." Then his next words shattered the air. "I'm banning you from this restaurant, permanently." The room erupted. A couple at the back murmured in approval. A man near the counter whistled under his breath. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen, nodding in agreement. Jessica's face flushed red. "You're joking." Richard's voice remained firm. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jessica scoffed, her confidence cracking. She turned to Tracy for support. But something was different now. Tracy wasn't laughing anymore, because for the first time, she realized something. Jessica could walk away from this unscathed, but she worked here. Her paycheck came from Richard. Her rent depended on this job. Her heart started to pound. "Mr. Carter," she said quickly, forcing a nervous smile. "Come on, it was just—" Richard cut her off. "You knew exactly what your sister was doing." His voice was sharper now. "And you laughed." Tracy swallowed hard. Richard didn't let up. "I run this place on one rule. Every customer is treated with respect." His voice dropped. "You broke that rule, and you did it on purpose." Tracy's stomach dropped. Jessica, oblivious to her sister's panic, rolled her eyes. "Ugh, whatever. Let's go, Tracy." But Tracy didn't move. Jessica turned, frowning. "Tracy?" Tracy's eyes darted between her sister and Richard, realization crashing into her like a tidal wave. She needed this job, and Richard wasn't bluffing. Tracy stammered, looking lost. "Mr. Carter, I swear I wasn't—" Richard shook his head. "Fired." Tracy's entire world tilted. "Wait, what?" No, please." Jessica's smirk vanished. "You can't be serious." Richard's tone was final. "Get out, both of you." Tracy turned to Jessica in panic. "Fix this." But Jessica was too stunned to speak. For the first time, she didn't hold the power. Tracy's breathing turned shallow. "Please, I need this job. She reached for Richard's arm, but he stepped back. "You should have thought about that before humiliating a customer," he said coldly. Tracy froze. The words hit like a sledgehammer, because for the first time, she understood. This was how Lena had felt. Helpless, small, and now it was her turn to be powerless. Jessica grabbed her arm. "Come on, we're leaving." Tracy didn't want to, but she had no choice. With one last furious glare at Lena, she stormed out. Jessica followed, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. The door slammed shut behind them, and just like that, it was over. A breath of relief washed over the diner. A few customers whispered, shaking their heads in disbelief. Richard let out a slow exhale, rubbing his temples. Then he turned back to Lena. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, his face softened. He knelt down, picked up her phone, and gently placed it back in her hands. His eyes searched hers, filled with something Lena hadn't seen much from strangers. Genuine care. "Are you okay?" he asked. Lena stared at him, and something inside her unraveled, because for the first time, someone didn't just stand by, someone stood up. Her hands shook as she typed a message. "Thank you," Richard smiled. "Anytime." She looked at her phone, the cracked screen reflecting the soft glow of the diner lights. A reminder of what had happened. A reminder of who she was. She wasn't weak. She wasn't invisible. And tonight, she wasn't alone. Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she nodded, because for the first time in a long, long time, she felt safe. And that changed everything. Resolution. The door had slammed behind Jessica and Tracy, leaving behind a heavy silence. The tension in the diner slowly unraveled, like a rope that had been pulled too tight for too long. Conversations resumed in hushed murmurs, the clinking of utensils against plates returning. But something had shifted. Lena stood in place, still gripping her phone, her fingers ghosting over the cracked screen. A small, fractured line at the corner. But it wasn't just glass that had cracked tonight. Something deeper had broken free inside her. She was used to this. The stares, the whispered judgments, the way people dismissed her like she was less than them, simply because she experienced the world differently. But this time, someone had fought for her. Richard Carter, the restaurant owner, hadn't just watched in silence. He hadn't waited for someone else to intervene. He had seen what had happened and acted. Lena's breath shuddered in her chest. It had been so long since someone had stood beside her. "Are you okay?" Richard had asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight. It meant he saw her, not just as a customer, not as an inconvenience, but as a person. She glanced down at her phone again. It was dead, but at this moment, she didn't need it to communicate. Slowly, she looked up, met Richard's gaze, and gave him a firm nod. He exhaled a breath of relief, offering her a small, knowing smile. The interaction didn't go unnoticed. A woman sitting at the counter gave Lena an encouraging nod. A couple whispered to each other, glancing at her with a look that wasn't pity, but respect. Then something unexpected happened. One of the other waiters, a younger guy named Luis, hesitated before stepping forward. He pulled out a small notepad from his apron pocket and scribbled something down. Then he turned the paper toward Lena. "We're glad you're here." Lena blinked. A warmth spread through her chest. It was such a simple thing. A message, written in ink. But to her, it was everything. For years, she had felt like she was walking through life alone. Like the world spoke in a language she couldn't understand, and nobody cared to meet her halfway. But tonight was different. She took a deep breath, then reached for Luis's pen. Beneath his words, she wrote two of her own. "Thank you." Luis grinned and nodded before heading back to work. Richard, meanwhile, turned to the rest of the staff, waiters, cooks, even the dishwasher who had peeked out from the kitchen to watch the confrontation. His voice was firm but calm. "If anyone here thinks what just happened was okay, you can leave right now." Nobody moved. Good. "From now on," Richard continued, "this restaurant is a place where everyone, no matter who they are, feels welcome." There was a pause. Then a small, scattered round of applause started from a few customers. It grew, soft but steady, a silent show of solidarity. Lena's throat tightened. This was not how she had expected the night to go. The days that followed news about the incident spread quickly. The next morning, a local blogger who had been in the diner posted about it. By the afternoon, someone had shared it on social media. By the end of the week, people were talking. Some were outraged that Jessica and Tracy had acted the way they did. Others praised Richard for standing up for Lena. But the most surprising thing? Customers started showing up. People who had never dined at Richard's restaurant before were now coming in. Not just for the food, but because they wanted to support a place that valued respect and inclusivity. One afternoon, a woman walked in, signing to her young daughter as they picked a table. Another day, a man came in with a hearing aid, glancing around the diner as if checking to see if he truly belonged. And each time, Richard made sure they felt welcome. One evening, Lena came back, not as a customer, but as a friend. She had spent the past few days thinking about what had happened. How Richard had stood up for her, how Luis had gone out of his way to communicate, how the customers had supported her without hesitation, and she realized something. She wanted to be part of that. She had spent so much time trying to avoid places where she felt uncomfortable, trying to shrink herself to avoid confrontation. But here she could exist freely. When she stepped inside the diner that evening, Richard looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "You're back," he said. Lena grinned, pulling out her phone and typing a quick response. "I was thinking, do you need another waitress?" Richard blinked in surprise, then chuckled. "You looking for a job?" She nodded. He crossed his arms, considering for a moment, before smiling. "Well, I can't say no to the bravest customer we've ever had." The weeks passed. Something even bigger happened. Richard decided to make a change. He brought in a consultant to train his staff on how to serve deaf and hard-of-hearing customers. He ordered small notepads and pens for every table, ensuring communication was never a barrier, and most importantly, he learned. He learned that Lena's experience wasn't unique, that there were thousands of people who had been ignored, dismissed, or mistreated simply because they couldn't hear the way others could. So he decided to make his restaurant a place where they were seen. Lena, now an employee, helped train the team. She taught them basic sign language. She shared tips on how to communicate more effectively. And slowly the diner transformed from just another restaurant to something more. It became a safe space, a place where people like her didn't have to struggle just to order a meal, a place where respect wasn't optional. Not long after the incident, Lena heard through the grapevine what had happened to Jessica and Tracy. Jessica, unsurprisingly, had moved on, pretending nothing had ever happened. She brushed off the event, dismissing it as people being too sensitive. But Tracy had struggled. She had been fired, and finding another job wasn't easy. Word had gotten around that she had been let go for mistreating a customer, and businesses weren't eager to take a chance on her. One day, months later, she walked into the diner, alone. Lena saw her before she saw Lena. Tracy looked different, tired, worn down by the reality of her choices. When her eyes landed on Lena, a flicker of shame crossed her face. She hesitated for a long moment, then without a word, pulled out her wallet, grabbed a $20 bill, and left it on the counter. Then she walked out. It wasn't an apology, but maybe in some small way, it was a start. Respect should never be conditional. No one should have to prove they deserve kindness. Lena had spent years navigating a world that wasn't built for her, but that night at the diner proved that change is possible, that people, the right people, will stand beside you, that sometimes all it takes is one voice speaking up to shift the entire conversation. And that, above all, Lena smiled as she refilled a customer's coffee, watching as the diner buzzed with life. A place that had once been just another stop in a world that ignored her was now a place where she belonged. And that was the best ending she could have hoped for. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this emotional story, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts about the story.